The brass anchor hummed under a flickering neon sign. A cinderblock bar 2 miles outside Fort Liberty in Fayetteville, North Carolina. It was Saturday night at 8:30 p.m. Country rock bled from a jukebox. Paratroopers unwound after a week of jump operations. Staff Sergeant Riley Grant sat alone in jeans and a gray PT shirt with her back tucked into a corner. She was a 68W combat medic specialist with 8 years in uniform and time attached to Ranger battalions. Her eyes tracked exits, crowd flow, and spacing, mapping angles like habit, not hobby. She drank slowly and let the noise pass through her. 3 contractors drifted over on a tide of cheap bourbon and bravado. Ethan Cole, a former MP, led with a shoulder and a smirk, while Ryan Mercer and Jared Blake, both ex-infantry, closed behind her and pinched the aisle. Their bodies blocked her egress as the music seemed to drop a half step. Riley kept her hands visible and told them to walk away. Cole gave a small shove to her shoulder and reset his stance. Training took over. Riley trapped his wrist, rotated outward, and hyperextended the elbow to shut down the striking arm. Mercer punched from her left and met an elbow to the solar plexus, followed by a sharp knee that folded him to the floor. Blake wrapped her from behind in a clumsy bear hug. She dropped her weight, snapped her hips, and drove the back of her head into the bridge of his nose. He let go with a wet gasp and staggered. Cole surged again, and she ended it with a controlled laryngeal stun, enough to stop the assault without crushing anything vital. Sergeant First Class Daniel Ortiz, retired infantry, stepped in and directed 82nd paratroopers to make space. Off-post meant statements. Riley disengaged, hands shaking, jaw swelling. Moment froze, asking what next minutes would cost. Riley Grant grew up in Rapid City, South Dakota, in a house where standards lived in small habits. Her father, Command Sergeant Major retired Thomas Grant, had led Rangers and still carried himself like every step mattered. He taught her to make the bed tight, to show up on time, to finish what she started. At 14, he walked beside her on a 5-mile ruck, not to break her, but to show how the mind can carry the body when comfort quits. She enlisted at 20 as a 68W combat medic specialist and learned the craft at advanced individual training on Fort Sam Houston. After graduation, she completed airborne school and reported to the 82nd Airborne Division, where tempo and accountability set the pace. 2 years in, she volunteered for the Cultural Support Team program and was selected to support Ranger battalions during combat operations. Her role was to bring medical skill forward, move with assault elements, read rooms, and care for people on both sides of the blast radius. Riley's professional identity formed around tactical combat casualty care and the march sequence. Always massive hemorrhage first, then airway, then respiration, then circulation, then preventing hypothermia and assessing head injury. The Silver Star sits on her service record, a line that honors a day most people never see. Not a trinket under a shirt. Small scars along her ribs and back match shrapnel and heat, and she keeps them private. Mentors taught her to be calm, to check the corners, to act only as needed, which is why the bar scene later shows training and restraint rather than ego. Humility anchors her, even when adrenaline tries to steer decisions. The convoy rolled into Sangin under a white sun when the lead MRAP met a vehicle packed for murder and turned into fire. The blast lifted steel and sand in the same breath. The truck flipped, and rounds inside began to cook off like dry thunder. Staff Sergeant Riley Grant was in the trail vehicle and felt the shock in her bones. Then she was moving before the dust stopped. She dismounted low, ran the flank, and slid to the wreck. Heat pressed her face as she found a narrow window punched by debris and forced her shoulders through. Inside was smoke, flame, metal groaning, and 2 Rangers still breathing. She hooked gloved hands onto gear and dragged the first man out in a slow fall to the dirt. She went back for the second and pulled him into the thin shade of the hull. Incoming popped in the distance, and she built a small island of work, Specialist Aaron Hayes bled bright from the thigh, the telltale of ephemeral hit, and she moved into March without thinking. Massive hemorrhage first. So a cat tourniquet went high and tight until bleeding was controlled and the strap bit. Airway looked patent. Respiration did not. And she heard the one-sided effort that turns minutes into seconds. She chose the site by habit. 4th to 5th intercostal space along the anterior axillary line, then drove a 14-gauge needle and felt the trapped air give. Hayes drew a better breath, and she covered him with a heat barrier because shock steals warmth. She keyed the radio and pushed a clean 9 line for a UH-60. Gave grid. Precedence urgent. Number and type. And marked the pickup with smoke as the rotor thump grew. They moved to the collection point for stabilization en route to Camp Bastion. His pulse faded in the helicopter, and she knew it by the way the world went quiet in her head. Later, the Silver Star went on her record in language that could not smell burning fuel or hear rounds bursting inside a hull. After Sangin, she slept 4 hours if lucky and scanned rooms without permission. Training had taken roots so deeply that danger felt like a place she already knew, and moving toward it felt like going home. 6 months after shifting to the Army Reserve, Riley clocked into a GS civilian logistics role with the 82nd Airborne Division Sustainment Brigade under the Division Sustainment Support Battalion at Fort Liberty. The job asked for spreadsheets, requisitions, and steady patience. Tasks that felt honest and necessary. Off-post, she tried to build a routine that looked like a normal life. Groceries, laundry, and a drive home that did not require checking mirrors for the tail of a convoy. The habits stayed even when the uniform came off. She chose chairs with her back in a corner, left a clean lane to the door, and counted heads without meaning to. In a quiet booth, she rehearsed cover and moved the way other people hum along to a song. A private loop that kept her calm. Sleep came in 4-hour blocks, as if some internal sergeant still ran a schedule. And the silence between alarms felt bigger than the room. At the brass anchor, Sergeant First Class retired Daniel Ortiz watched her nurse one beer for 40 minutes and never let her guard slip. He knew the set of the shoulders and the way eyes do a slow circuit. Tells from decades as an infantry NCO. He did not see someone hunting for a fight. He saw a soldier who had not learned how to set the armor down. Between the war zone and the streets outside the gate, Riley floated in a narrow channel where readiness and belonging rarely meet. The loss of a mission made small choices feel heavy. She wanted to be the medic who could sit and breathe without a plan. Yet the wiring that kept her alive did not switch off. That is why a simple shove later would light a fuse that had been trimmed short by years of training. Not anger. Not pride. Only conditioning waiting for a cue. Saturday at 8:30 p.m. The brass anchor carried a low roar of music and talk 2 miles outside Fort Liberty. Staff Sergeant Riley Grant kept her back to a corner. Eyes running exits and the line she would take if things turned. The air smelled like cleaner and spilled beer. She let her hands rest open on the table. 3 contractors drifted into her space. Ethan Cole, a former MP, leaned close, while Ryan Mercer and Jared Blake, both former infantry, slid to her flanks. Their bodies pinched her egress and forced a crowding pressure she knew too well. Riley gave a clear warning to walk away and kept her voice level. Cole shoved her shoulder. That was the start. Her right hand caught his wrist on the outside and turned it outward as her body stepped offline. The joint opened and the striking arm went dead. Mercer came fast from the left. She drove an elbow into his solar plexus and followed with a knee that removed his legs from the plan. He folded and stayed down. The move bought one breath of space. Blake wrapped her from behind in a sloppy bear hug. Riley dropped her weight and snapped her hips. The back of her head met the bridge of his nose, and he let go with a shocked sound. She stepped clear and reset her stance. Cole surged again. She touched the front of his neck with a controlled laryngeal stun, firm enough to shut down the attack without crushing his airway. Then she disengaged, created distance, and raised her hands in a show of non-threat. The whole sequence ran out in 12 to 14 seconds. Sergeant First Class Daniel Ortiz, retired infantry after 22 years. Moved between parties and took charge. He told nearby paratroopers from the 82nd to hold space and keep bystanders back. He secured the camera DVR and flagged the clip for later. The room cooled a few degrees. Fayetteville Police Department arrived first and took control. Officers gathered witness statements and requested the security video. Military police from the Provost Marshal Office assisted because a soldier was involved and advised on proportionality and possible administrative follow-up. Off-post rules were clear, and everyone respected the lane. Riley felt the adrenaline dump hit. Her hands shook, and her jaw swelled from the shove that began it. The noise of the bar came back in pieces. The danger shifted from fists to paperwork and truth. And a quiet question formed about what the next hour might cost. The restroom hums with fluorescent light as cold water hammers her split knuckles. Cleaner hangs in the air, and a thin pink spiral turns in the drain, while her jaw swells under a steady pulse. The tremor that follows the fight sets into her hands like a drumbeat she cannot quiet. She feels the split between healer and fighter as if it were a seam in bone. Remembering a chest decompression with improvised tools and the drag of a teammate from a burning shell without letting the pictures turn vivid. She runs a quick self-assessment the way she has done 100 times on other people. Range of motion, bleeding, controlled. Sensation intact. Nothing that needs a hospital tonight. She breathes on a 4 count and watches the shake ease to a smaller circle. In the mirror, she sees a medic who wants to stand down and a body that still searches for the next task. Outside the door, Sergeant First Class retired Daniel Ortiz waits with an ice pack and a compact first aid kit. He cleans and dresses the knuckles with calm hands and a steady voice that carries years of NCO triage. He states the risk off post and the optics of a soldier dropping 3 intoxicated men. Mentions that the contractor has contacts and notes that the camera footage is backed up. He does not dramatize or scold, and he adds that Fayetteville Police will lead while military police assist, because that is the lane. Her phone buzzes, and Command Sergeant Major retired Thomas Grant asks if she is okay. She answers with a polite, "I am fine," and knows they both read between the words. Ortiz suggests a path at the U.S. Army Medical Center of Excellence at Joint Base San Antonio Fort Sam Houston, where instructors with deployment experience teach tactical combat casualty care and mass casualty lanes. It is not therapy, he says, but it is purpose. And the idea lands like a handhold at the bottom of a well. Fayetteville Police Department arrived first at about 8:45 p.m. and took control of the room. Officers separated witnesses, cleared a path, and asked Sergeant First Class retired Daniel Ortiz for the security video from the bar system. He produced the DVR unit and initiated a clean export while maintaining a chain of custody log on paper. Staff Sergeant Caleb Morrison from the Provost Marshal Office stepped in to assist because a soldier was involved. Morrison coordinated with the FPD lead officer in a quiet corner by the register. He verified Riley Grant's unit status and provided contact details for administrative follow-up through the Provost Marshal Office, while affirming that FPD held primary jurisdiction off-post. Radios murmured. Pens moved. And the crowd settled into the slow work of statements. The rhythm felt procedural rather than dramatic. Command Sergeant Major retired Thomas Grant entered with a steady bearing that asked for nothing beyond fairness. He did not give orders. He simply suggested that the officers review the footage before any determination. Ortiz cued the clip, and the screen showed Ethan Cole initiating contact, Ryan Mercer and Jared Blake blocking egress, and Staff Sergeant Riley Grant using controlled force to break contact and disengage before stepping away. The measured outcomes came without raised voices. FPD indicated that self-defense appeared supported by witness accounts, and the video and requested a written statement from each party, along with a digital copy for the case file. Military police noted proportionality considerations for a soldier acting in a civilian setting and documented the event for potential administrative review. Then deferred to the local authority. Air loosened as the crisis shifted from fists to forms. Riley stood beside her father and set her breathing to a calm count while he said little. Fairness felt like process working instead of power speaking. The lot was quiet under sodium lights as gravel clicked under boots. The brass anchor sat behind them like a spent match while the last cars pulled away. Law enforcement had cleared the call and the tape was down. Staff Sergeant Riley Grant stood beside Command Sergeant Major retired Thomas Grant and let the noise drain out of her chest. She spoke plainly about the hum that never stopped in her head and the 4-hour sleep that broke like thin ice. Hypervigilance felt useful until it tripped every room into a threat map. She admitted the cold ease she felt using controlled force and how fast it arrived when someone closed her space. Pride sat on one shoulder while shame shifted on the other, and neither would look her in the eye. Her father answered in the language of leaders who have carried weight for years. "Those reflexes kept you alive downrange," he said without raising a voice. "But they do not fit in garrison or off-post life." He noted that Fayetteville Police held primary jurisdiction and military police assisted because a soldier was involved, and he respected that process. During the drive, he called the program director at the U.S. Army Medical Center of Excellence at Joint Base San Antonio, Fort Sam Houston, where an instructor slot stood open for tactical combat casualty care and mass casualty lanes. Riley listened to the offer and let the idea settle like steady ground. She said yes, and her father gave a brief hand squeeze. 2 seconds. Firm and simple. The lot held its breath, and she felt the next mission click into place. Not therapy, but purpose at last. 6 weeks later, at the U.S. Army Medical Center of Excellence at Joint Base San Antonio, Fort Sam Houston, the training bay breathed with controlled chaos. Staff Sergeant Riley Grant taught while remaining in the Army Reserve and holding a GS civilian role, moving between lanes where 68W students rotated through mass casualty scenarios. Mannequins bled on cue, radios hissed, and clipboards tracked steps as teams worked. She watched posture, pace, and communication, correcting only what mattered and letting practice do the rest. Private Noah Park froze at the sight of a chest rising wrong and a pulse turning thin. Riley brought him back to the checklist by naming the sequence in a calm cadence. First, massive hemorrhage with a tourniquet high and tight. Then, airway assessment to confirm a clear path. Then respiration with a needle decompression guided by landmarks. He placed a 14-gauge needle at the 4th to 5th intercostal space along the anterior axillary line and felt the release. Then moved to circulation and hypothermia prevention with steady hands. Sergeant First Class Elena Ortega observed from the aisle and marked that students lean in when the instructor has been downrange. Riley emphasized glove changes, sharps control, and clear handoffs so the lane stayed safe for everyone. The mannequin parameters improved and the tablet flashed stable as the team secured dressings and prepared a clean 9-line template on the whiteboard. Riley walked the line and straightened a cat tourniquet tail, nudged a chest seal edge flat, and reminded a student to breathe. The room settled into a learning rhythm that felt earned. Checklists on clipboards, staged bags, and quiet nods replaced noise. Riley felt steady for the first time in months and understood that the same skills that once pulled her toward danger now built confidence in others. Purpose took root one repetition at a time. Early evening settles over Joint Base San Antonio, Fort Sam Houston, as traffic thins and the sky turns soft. Staff Sergeant Riley Grant stands on a small balcony after a training day and calls Command Sergeant Major retired Thomas Grant to check in. She tells him teaching feels different than she expected and lighter in a way that still asks a lot. He listens and says he is proud of the courage to ask for help and choose a purpose that saves lives at home. Inside the U.S. Army Medical Center of Excellence, the training bay glows with quiet work. Students review notes and check cat tourniquets, then tidy sharps, containers, and wipe-down stations with easy focus. A whiteboard holds a clean 9-line medevac template, and the markers are capped and lined up. Ambient sounds fall away to a steady rhythm that feels like a unit finding its pace. Riley walks the line and corrects small details with a calm voice and open hands. A chest seal edge gets pressed flat. A sling is retied. A glove change happens on time. A handoff gets cleaner on the second try. Sergeant First Class Elena Ortega nods from the aisle as teams reset lanes for the next rotation. The room looks ordinary, and that ordinary is exactly what real readiness needs. Riley steps back into the evening and thinks about the part of her that once moved toward danger without pause. It still lives in her, but now it sits inside a framework that serves others and keeps people breathing. She asks viewers to share what the next mission means in their lives and to subscribe for more true-to-life stories from the community that wears or supports the uniform. Purpose can be rebuilt through service and mentorship, and it grows one deliberate repetition at a time.